Hey, Fraser. Thanks for your work in week two, and want to give you some quick reaction here. First of all, no big problem if you dip into the resources that are kind of part of Forum 2 before you give your responses in Forum 1. I sort of trust you to make whatever judgments you're going to make about how you want to digest the material. My rationale, just so you know, for kind of ordering things the way that I do is that I find that if you kind of work with the text of Matthew in that first forum and, sort of like bring some of your inchoate ideas to expression, even if they're tentative, but you just kind of like get them out there. And then you read like my weird ideas or the articles that I've assigned in the second forum, then you can actually feel the tension a little bit more. You're sort of struck by the difference maybe between what you had sort of come to in that first forum and what you're encountering in the second one. And that I find is often more generative for then whatever you're going to learn. Obviously the idea isn't to get you to land on what I think or what a secondary writer thinks. It's more to kind of just feed your own thought process so that you can grow from wherever you're at um, in your understanding and interpretation of Matthew. So don't get too hung up on the order in which you're doing things. Then I want to answer your question about Carter's claims about paralysis and other illnesses that are featured in Matthew and the rest of the New Testament and the Old Testament for that matter, and their relationship to imperial oppression, to political subjugation, that sort of thing. Um, this is a bigger question, and so I try to be succinct. Feel free to reply if I don't quite hit what you're after. But um, broadly, what Carter is trying to show is how the illnesses that people are pictured as suffering in Matthew's gospel are not just like sporadic and out of nowhere because our world is a tragic place, sort of thing. They are sicknesses that are at least aggravated, maybe in some cases caused by the difficult and oppressive conditions in which people are living. And so the wounds, the difficulties, the disabilities of their bodies are a kind of witness to the oppressive powers that they're living under. So paralysis specifically, um, can result from a lot of things, but it does have something to do with the availability of adequate food resources, nutrition. It has to do with the kind of pressures that bodies are living under. And so the disease of paralysis can be a byproduct of a way that a community is deprived, and therefore the way certain bodies are responding to that deprivation, the way people are living under threat all the time, with extreme levels of stress, anxiety that's testing their relationships with one another as they're trying to bear up under this kind of hegemonic force that is suffocating their life all the time. I think that there's a lot of truth to that, but I want to go myself maybe a little deeper than that and say that the conditions of people's lives are not just attributable to imperial oppression, but they are a sort of picture of what the wider community is suffering. So, just to give maybe a more obvious example, a little bit later on in chapter 9, we're going to encounter a woman who has been bleeding from her womb for 12 years, we're told. And with some of the context of Matthew there, I would say it's clear that she is bearing witness to the kind of death, you might even say infertility, that the whole community of the 12 tribes of Israel has been suffering as a consequence of their sins, as a consequence of foreign oppression, which is not unrelated to their sins. But the key is not that you can attribute, her specific condition to a specific imperial cause or something. It's more that however she's come to suffer from this condition, what it reflects is what her wider community is suffering. You see the same kind of thing with, say, in the prophet Isaiah. We'll deal with this in chapter 12. Isaiah 41, 42 describes Israel as a people as blind and deaf. And that's the result of shaping their life over generations with gods that are blind and deaf. And so there's a kind of systemic blindness to one another, deafness to one another, blindness to other gifts of God, um, like the gift of land and the need to nurture it and to distribute it justly, a systemic deafness to the cries of the needy, deafness to other kinds of difficulty that require attention and mercy, but people have acquired structures and habits that make them neglectful of those needs. So there's an example where the prophet describes the people of God as blind and deaf. And so when Jesus is, tending to the needs of specific blind and deaf people, there's something that is pictured about the condition of the wider community and the suffering of these particular bodies. So that's maybe another layer that I would add to Carter's attempt to help us see, and this is, I think, correct, that Jesus is not just like, you know, being brought in Matthew, people with random ailments, like obviously people had colds, they suffered from the flu. People probably had cancer, these kinds of things. But the conditions that are foregrounded in the narrative are conditions that especially reflect the wider suffering and need of the community that Jesus has come to deliver. So, hope that's helpful to you. Um, you had some great stuff here in Forum 2. Love what you say about the baptism of Jesus. I think you're gaining a lot of insight into the significance of Jesus as someone who is in solidarity with the condition of his people. So he doesn't relate to their sin as somebody else's problem. It's his problem because these are his people. This is their adopted homeland, their memory, their hope, and all of that Jesus owns. And that, of course, means suffering for Jesus because he doesn't run away, but faces it as his own. We're going to see that, of course, develop over the course of the narrative, culminating in the cross. So lots that we could say there, but I'd say the solidarity of Jesus with his people's sin and suffering is a really crucial dimension of Matthew's gospel and key to his healing power, key to the hope of Jesus, not just for some of his people, but for all of his people, and not just for his people, but for all the peoples of the world. It's about that solidarity. Lots we can learn, right, about our own calling in life as Christians, pastors, whatever role we're in, that our ability to convey Christ's healing power, I think, does depend on how we mingle our lives with one another, how we share the burdens of each other, rather than relating to others' difficulty from, a place of aloofness, a place of, we don't deserve to suffer the way that others do. That kind of mentality, I think, keeps us from enjoying the healing power of God in Christ, whereas we can see how the healing power of God in Christ works in Matthew. Thanks again, man, for some great stuff. Hey, we're gonna start having in-person group in Pasadena this next week on Friday. Also, if you can't make that, live discussion groups, but hope we'll get a chance to talk more directly eventually in person, and maybe if not in person right away, in one of the live discussion groups on Zoom. this next week. Hope one of the times will work for you.